Welcome everybody to the webinar today. The topic of discussion is the shape of the contact center industry in 2020 and beyond. My name is Charlie and I'll be your chairperson today, and I'm also the features editor here at Call Center Helper. And we have two excellent speakers to introduce to you today, favorites, and have been on many of our webinars before. Firstly is Dr. Nicholas Millard. Hi, Nicola.
Hello, how you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. I just wondered if you could once again kind of introduce yourself to everybody and kind of your role within BT.
So yes, I'm part of BT's innovation team. I used to be BT's futurologist, but got really sick of the crystal ball jokes. So I now rather more boringly am head of customer insights and futures, and I'm the psychologist in the innovation team. And my role very much is to understand the kind of consumer behaviors, how those behaviors are changing, and then the ripple-on effects of what we need to think about in the contact center. So I also work with our large global corporates mostly, so I don't work that much with BT's own contact centers. I'm mostly in other people's contact centers, so whether that's airlines, banks, insurers, retailers, all of that kind of thing I tend to get involved with.
Excellent. I think futurologist is probably one of the best job titles I've heard. And we also have Jeremy Payne from Ngos Interactive. Jeremy, welcome.
Oh, thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Nicola. Yeah, I mean, my role in Ngos is really sort of heading up marketing in the EMEA region at the moment, but I also work very closely with our global product leads. So, you know, thinking about where the market is going, where our customers are heading, what they need. So it's really interesting hearing the comment from Barry in the chat room, because Barry's really not alone in that sense. I think a lot of people are sort of struggling with headcount issues, staff turnover, staff skills, and we'll get into that and some of the reasons behind that in the presentation later.
Excellent. I think, yeah, it's obviously a key issue that many contact centers are facing, so it'll be really good to hear about how you can address that issue. I think just something that I want to mention before we introduce both Nicola's and Jeremy's presentation is that we like to make our webinars as interactive as possible. So if you have any tips or questions that you'd like to send into our panelists in between their presentations, please go to our chat room, which is www.callcenterhelper.com/chat, and from there you can download slides in the chat log. So after, if you want to reflect on any kind of key learnings from today's webinar, it's a really important place to be. And also, I think a key bit of advice I would give to everyone is to, if your screen is big enough, is to have the chat room on one side of your screen and the webinar on the other, so you can kind of keep up to date with everything that's going on. And just finally, if you want to watch the replay after the kind of webinar's over and you want to reflect again on any ideas, just go to www.callcenterhelper.com/recorded-webinars, and that will be available later this afternoon. And as an additional incentive of being in the chat room, there is a bottle of champagne or a box of chocolates for the best tips. So yeah, that's a nice little incentive, I think, for everyone. But now, to finally kind of get going with the main topics of the webinar, I just want to introduce a quick poll, and that is, which trend has had the biggest impact on the contact center over the past 5 years? Improving advisor experience, digital channels / self-service, cloud, managing customer data, or artificial intelligence? I'll just launch that poll for everyone now. And excellent. What kind of results are you expecting to see here, Nicola?
I think it kind of depends who you ask, because if you ask the IT guys, I suspect they're going to say cloud. If you ask the operations guys, I would say, well, actually, again, strategy may be different than operations. I think digital channels and self-service has fundamentally changed the contact center and made our lives a lot more complex, because the easy stuff doesn't come through anymore, which could be a good thing, but also makes our lives a lot more difficult. So yeah, it depends who you ask, but yeah, cloud or digital channels.
And would you go along with that, Jeremy?
Yeah, they would have been the two that I picked out. I would have picked digital channels, self-service, you know, the power in people's pocket in terms of the mobile phone and the apps that are available on it. So if you think about how you work, for example, with your bank now and how you did it 10 years ago, you know, the apps that you have on your phone are actually, you know, quite decent pieces of software that you can do some quite sophisticated things with. So those kind of digital channels and the ability to self-service has changed quite a lot. Clearly, the cloud is something that everyone's talking about, but for different reasons.
Excellent. And well, it looks like you were definitely both right on the digital channel slash self-service, which was 50% of our audience said that. We had 9% improving advisor experience, which could arguably be higher. There's cloud 7%, managing customer data 11%, and artificial intelligence 15%. And I think that's the perfect kind of run on to your presentation, Nicola. So I'll just hand the baton over to you, and I'll let you take over.
Marvelous. This is where we test the technology. So
yes.
Here we go. Let's see what we can do. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Hang on. Let's put it into full launch mode. So yes, future of the contact center. Future of the contact center is something that I've been working on for probably as long as I've worked on contact centers, which is over 25 years now. So I always say my PhD was also in contact centers, so I am slightly obsessed with the industry. So and we're doing a lot more on the future of the contact center. But as I said, you know, I got tired of the crystal ball jokes, because you can't just look at a crystal ball and figure out what's going on. You do actually have to do data, and these slides feature quite a lot of data. I always have to show this slide. It's kind of mandatory that people don't know BT do innovation, and we do a lot of innovation. We're the third largest investor in innovation in the UK, behind a couple of pharmaceutical companies. We are just dreadful about talking about it. So part of my role is to say, hey, we do innovation, and obviously the innovation I tend to do is very much in the contact center space, and I'll make some connections with some of the things we're doing around innovation as we go along. But I thought this is one of my oldest slides, and I managed to find it a while back because I thought it was fun. And these were some of the future visions that we came up with in 1995, which was the future contact center for 2000. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not sure I've seen that many contact centers that look like this, but I am starting to see, I'm doing quite a lot on the future of the office at the moment, and we are starting to see office spaces look a little bit like this. So there's all sorts of things within these slides that kind of powered our thinking. The untethering piece. So do we need to be sitting at a desk to do our jobs anymore? Because we don't necessarily have to be. Some of us are shoulder bag workers. So can we release people from their desks? Can we get them to work in a space that they like, that makes them feel good, that makes them feel productive? We anticipated things like video as well. So we created these video booths where you're in your little video bubble. We also looked at mobility and that looks a little bit like an iPad down there. Now, iPads had not been invented in 2000, so that was quite a radical vision. We didn't invent the iPad, by the way, but actually one of the patents in the iPad is a BT patent. So the thing that, you know, when you turn the iPad, it turns the screen. The accelerometer is actually one of our patents that we sold to Apple. So there's a component in there for BT, but we didn't invent the iPad. But I think we have, I mean, that was a vision of 2000. We're 19 years on, and I actually think the technology that enables all of this is there. It's just that we haven't necessarily rethought the contact center itself, and I think it's probably time we did, because my standard joke is the only thing that changes in contact centers is the carpets. And as we've already seen from that first poll, things like self-service and automation is radically starting to transform the contact center into something that isn't about processing lots and lots of calls really, really fast, but something that's adding significant value that the automation can't. Now, I have to say, the only contact center I've actually specifically found that looks remotely like any of these visions is the Airbnb one. And it's interesting to look at Airbnb. A lot of their contact isn't phone. So we've got, you know, a lot of web chat, a lot of messaging going on. And that requires a slightly different environment to the phone. The phone, it's all about noise and noise dampening. Actually, with chats, it's a quiet environment. And again, we need to start to think, as our channel mixture changes, is the standard environment that we build for acoustics the right environment? So let's have a look at some of the data. I always say, I haven't got a crystal ball. What I do have in BT is some lovely research that we've been doing for a very long time. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen this research before. This year, the previous iteration, which was 2017, was called Chat Tap Talk. We also called it the Autonomous Customer. But because we've been doing this for a while, and we started back in 2010 with 2 countries, 500 customers per country, we tend to do this research every other year. So those mathematically minded will see that the last iteration was 2017. We are currently talking about doing a new iteration, so watch this space. But what we can start to do from this data, because we've got kind of longitudinal, is we can start to see some very distinct trends around customers' preferences. So we ask lots of questions of customers, and broadly around the world, we try and get a good sort of flavor of demographic, age, all of that lovely stuff. And we ask them lots of questions around how do you interact with organizations generally. So we get a few things out of this, and I think I get very excited by this graph. I know a lot of people don't get excited by graphs, and I understand, but this graph is actually the UK data from 4 iterations of the research, so the 2011, 2013, 2015 and 2017, and it's reflective of the ways that channel use is changing amongst customers. So what we can start to see, firstly, overall, there is a downward trend on contact, and that's where that automation and self-service has come in, because if it's good, the customer is perfectly happy to serve themselves, as long as it's easy and as long as it puts them in control. So we can see that actually customers are contacting less. But we can also see that some of the newer channels maybe aren't overtaking the older channels. We're still seeing the older legacy channels dominate. So the phone, still very dominant. Email, still very dominant. And I think each of these channels are starting to get their niches, and I'll talk a little bit about, where the phone fits in a minute. But we can't forget the old channels. We might get excited about the new channels, but actually the only channels that are growing are web chat. That's growing phenomenally. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute as well. The only other one that's growing is apps, and that goes along with the trend around the smartphone. So we're sort of seeing those 2 accelerate, but again, not to the extent to which the older channels are falling. And then rather surprisingly, given we had whole conferences on social media a couple of years ago, the hype around social media and service hasn't really kind of emerged, and I think for 2 reasons. Firstly, it's a very public channel, so you're doing everything in public. And secondly, the expectation of those channels were hyped. So people were expecting a response, say, on Twitter within 15 minutes. Now, some companies do that. Other companies never reply. So we're seeing actually a downward trend on social media. So the first thing is, yes, there's a lot of channels out there. The second thing is that actually giving more channels to customers mean they use more channels, actually. So it's not a substitution thing. You put one channel in and another channel basically declines rapidly. So the more channels you put in, the more channels customers are likely to use. Now, obviously, I'm a psychologist, so I'm more interested in not so much in the channels, but why. So you may have seen some of this stuff before, but this is some research that we've done over the years to try and figure out why customers use the channels that they do. And actually, largely, firstly, customers don't consider themselves omni-channel. They're goal-directed, but underlying that goal is an intention state. And that intention state is either positive, negative, or neutral. And it's the intention state that tends to drive the channel choice. So if we look at, we call them visionaries, utilitarians, and customers in crisis. They have very different channel behaviors. So visionaries typically have a positive goal. Now, that means they want to do this thing, whether it's going on holiday or buying a house or opening a new business. So they'll do their research. They're willing to invest time, energy, and effort in it. They use a lot of channels to do this. They may get a bit paranoid, may need a bit of advice, may need a nudge. You might want to put a bot in. You might need an expert agent. But actually, as long as these channels don't contradict each other, visionaries are easy to deal with, to be honest, compared with customers in crisis. And of course, they can become customers in crisis quite rapidly as well. So we've all been there, we've hit a problem. We've got angry, we've got frustrated, and hormones run into our brains that make us, well, critically it halves our short-term memory capacity. So if we're designing services for customers in crisis, it's actually quite difficult to put self-service unless it's really easy in front of them. In fact, the tendency behavior on customers in crisis is to reach for the phone and want human contact. So that's where we're seeing, you know, the bulk of the phone contact into contact centers tends to be a lot of customers in crisis. And again, it will depend on your industry as to how many you have of those. But we're not always positive and negative. There is a midpoint. We call them utilitarians. That's where self-service really does come in. So, you know, these are routine transactions, paying bills, buying carrots. I don't need wow. I just need it to work. So we can see that good self-service there works really well. But I think what we can start to do from this is to start to figure out channel strategies, but also where the contact center fits in to this pattern. So in actual fact, if we look at the phone, for example, the phone's a fascinating channel. What we're finding is that call volumes are going down, but call handle times, particularly in industries like financial services, are going up by as much as 40%. And that's because, you know, banks, for example, have pushed an awful lot into apps and self-service, so we don't call them very often. When we do call them, it's usually because the problem's emotive or complex. Although we're also seeing, you know, people calling in because the digital channels have failed. So that the current pet hate of customers is that lovely message that we often put on the on hold thing saying, did you know you could do this on the digital channel? And usually you get this kind of, oh my God, that's why I'm ringing you, because the digital channel's failed. We've also got this kind of acceleration. I mean, things around agents putting me on hold, or I know more than the agents. Some people are looking at it as very negative, and I do think, you know, training and knowledge systems are really needed now for agents because we can't train them all the time. But I think it's symptomatic of the fact that we are seeing real complexity hit the phone channel. And it was interesting, I was at Call and Contact Center Expo in London last week and had a really interesting conversation with somebody saying, yeah, we might need to rethink our strategy because we're putting our new agents onto the phone and then they graduate onto web chat. And I'm kind of going, it's probably the wrong way around because we're still getting a lot of easy transactional stuff often coming through on the web chat channels. The phone is taking the complexity. So there's an argument that you might well need to put your most expert agents on the phone. Then we've got things like video. Now, this is a small channel, but it's one that we're doing quite a lot of innovation with. Firstly, around this sort of tendency for customers to self-serve using things like YouTube. So we're doing quite a lot with personalized video as a service, for example, which is like a mail merge for video. Basically, you squirt customers' information into a video template. You send it to them over a link. They click on it, and it's about them. So it tells them about their mortgage or their loan. And we often do put a phone number at the end of that. And we get, you know, opportunities for cross-sell and upsell on that kind of thing. But I think the other aspect of video that's interesting, firstly, expert advice, so medical advice, mortgage advice, we're already seeing that kind of thing going into the contact center. But actually in BT, one of the big innovations that we've been looking at and actually are rolling out at the moment is the ability for an agent to use the smartphone in the hands of the customer to actually do remote diagnostics. So in the case of Cycle, which we're rolling out in our UK contact centres, particularly for broadband faults, we can send the customer a link. They click on the link, and that link enables the remote agent to take control of the camera and the light on the customer's smartphone, obviously with their permission. And then we can kind of say, well, what have you got plugged in? And we can all even do an AI overlay on this around pattern recognition, because all of the wires are standard. We can figure out what wires the camera is seeing. We can actually figure out what plug it should go into. We can do little animations to help both the agent and the customer plug the wire into the right place. So there's all sorts of things we can do without having to send an engineer out, I think. But again, we need an expert agent at the end to actually figure out what they're seeing and what things should be plugged in. For us, it saves us a lot of money around engineer visits. For customers, it solves their problem fast. So I think we're starting to see some interesting stuff in the video space. But to be honest, chat is where it's at. We're seeing a phenomenal growth in chat. In the gap between the 2015 survey and the 2017 survey, we've seen a 20% uptake in terms of people's preferences to chat with an organization. And I think that's driven by the fact it's a digital first channel, it's an easy channel. Actually, corporates quite like it because it's often cheaper than phone and email, so they're kind of pushing it as well. Actually, the agent interviews we've done around chat, agents pretty much like chat as well, because you don't have to put the customer on hold, you don't have to make small talk, all of that kind of stuff isn't there. But of course, we are seeing a lot of transactional stuff coming through chat, which is where the chatbot really comes in. And I think again, when we look at this data, and this is 2 years old, it may have changed in the 2 years since we did the last survey, but we got this real high expectation, probably because of the hype around this. So 73% of customers saying they think that chatbots will improve customer service. I am not sure that there's any evidence that that is happening at the moment, but I mean, there's some great bots out there, and typically the bots that are great are very narrow and deep bots. My personal favorite is Margot the wine bot, part of Lidl's portfolio. So Nuance, I believe, did the engine behind that, but Margot only does one thing very well, and that's food wine combinations. You can't ask Margot about anything else, and I think that's a very good example of a narrow, deep bot that does work. So I've been doing an awful lot on bots. I keep saying they might well be IVR for digital. I think a lot of the lessons we learned from IVR we can bring into the bot world. You know, firstly, they don't work by magic. You do need a lot of data behind them. So often when I'm asked about bots, firstly, I usually ask, why do you want to use one? Secondly, what data have you got to fuel it? Because it is garbage in, garbage out, and often enterprise data is really messy. So there's a problem there. It doesn't work for things like complaints. So it doesn't work for everything. Complaints are particularly difficult because they're often very long, very rambling. Human language is vastly redundant, so we have to try and pass things out to actually get the machine to understand what on earth the customer's on about. Then you throw in things like sarcasm, and they get completely flummoxed. So they're not good on sarcasm, they're not good on emotion, even though you know, emotional contacts we can start to pick up. I mean, the camera here could be analyzing my facial expression to figure out, am I happy, am I sad? I could look at the language and figure out, you know, how am I feeling? But it's not 100% reliable. Basically, we know from this very old theory, it's called Moravec's paradox, which is a theory that came out of the 80s, actually. Hans Moravec was a roboticist who quite rightly pointed out that machines are very good at doing things where there's process, where there's data, where there are rules. They're not very good at things which are messy and complex and emotive. And even things like conversation is quite difficult to automate. We're much better at it than a machine. So actually, I don't like the word artificial intelligence. I prefer augmented intelligence, because actually we've got some fantastic agents with a fantastic brain who could be augmented by technologies that are good at following process and data. The last thing you want your agents to be is a robot, frankly. So we have done some scenarios for the future as part of a paper we did last year called Botman versus Super Agents, mostly because I like superhero movies. But we started to sort of figure out, well, what are agents likely to be doing in the future? So we've got Sally, who is, I call her the Swiss Army knife advisor, who's picking up where the automation has failed. We've got Paula, the problem solver, who's sticking the fork into the spaghetti of back-end process on behalf of the customer. We've got Natalie, who's a negotiator, who probably would be sort of equated to your high-level escalations team. Now, negotiation is rules-based, but it's also social and emotional. So that's very difficult to automate. I think we're going to need a lot of Natalies. We've got Tony, who's a techie. A lot of what techies, and I'm not just talking about technical techies here, people who are experts, a lot of that knowledge is in their head. I did some work in the 90s around developing neural networks for complex fault diagnostics on BT's network, and you'd interview engineers and they'd have a lovely decision tree table that you could put into a neural network until you hit the bottom and you said, well, why did you decide it was that fault, not that fault? And they'd always say gut feeling. And you can't automate gut feeling. That's why, again, human in the loop is very desirable here for expertise. And then I've also included Chris, who's a crowdsourced advisor. In other words, he's in the cloud. He has specific skills that we can pull in as and when we need him. So sort of a gig economy, outsourced, that sort of model. I have to say that all of these people are probably also going to be training the bots. So a lot of this is around supervised bots. They've also got to make sure that they're behaving ethically and we can sustain them into the future. So I think, you know, underlying a lot of this is skills-based routing, networked expertise, we call it. So making sure that we don't have a disjointed experience from the bot to the transition process to the agent. So can we pick up the conversation, figure out what that conversation is about, route it to the right advisor, and also provide the advisor with all of the previous history of the conversation, so they don't have to, the customer doesn't have to repeat themselves. And then the final trend I think that's interesting for the contact center is this trend that I call the me-conomy, but it's all about going from personalized to proactive to predictive. Now, again, this is all about data, and contact centers are a central repository for everything that customers tell us. And that's one interesting thing. I think if we play our cards right, we become a lot more strategic to the organization, because we start to learn a lot about customers from that contact center data. Learning about customers means that we can then start to personalize the experience, as of course Amazon and Netflix have done for years, and people are quite comfortable with that. Once we've personalized it, we can start to become proactive. So can we tell customers things that they want to know before they have to contact us? So this is really managing demand outwards rather than having to manage demand inwards. So we're working on innovations, so for example, with companies like IMO Mobile, with Contact Engine, to look at, can we start to target the right message to the customer on the right channel at the right time? So things they really do want to know. And actually, again, customers actually quite welcome that if it's appropriate. Then we take the next step and start to become predictive. The algorithms start to really kick in, but also the creepiness line starts to impinge. So if we know more about customers than customers know about themselves, is that creepy? And certainly some retailers have already crossed the creepy line. I was with one big supermarket. They said, their analysts said they could tell if you're about to get divorced from your data. You probably wouldn't use someone like IMI Mobile and Contact Engine to send a message out, to a customer saying, I'm really sorry to hear you're getting divorced, because, well, you might not know. Maybe vouchers for wine would be more appropriate, but you get my message. Actually, a lot of this is around appropriateness. And again, that's human in the loop stuff. What should we be messaging for our customers? So I think there's an awful lot we need to think about here, particularly when we get into the realm of things like the Internet of Things. Because for me, Internet of Things as a psychologist seems to be all of my devices are now talking about me behind my back. Do I like that? Possibly not. And if I don't like it, I turn it off. And if customers turn it off, we don't get the data, the algorithms don't work, which is why I call it a me-conomy. And obviously things like the GDPR regulation has made it perfectly easy for customers to withdraw their consent. So I think, the contact center is in an interesting place at the moment. There's lots of automation. Inevitably, that complexity starts to hit the contact center, which has a huge impact on the skill sets and the tools that we need to give our agents. But also, can we start to use that data in a much more meaningful and strategic way to push out to customers to actually maybe minimize the demand into the routine demand into the contact center, and actually benefit the customers by telling them things they want to know? So that's kind of, where we're going in terms of our vision of the contact center. We're going to hopefully do some more of the trends research this year, and hopefully do more of a deep dive on what we think those ripple-on effects might be for the contact center. So I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully I can hand things back at some point. Let's stop sharing.
There you go. I've taken over now.
Thank you. Thanks,
Excellent.
Charlie.
No worries. Thank you, Nicola. There was lots of great stuff. I was actually making notes away to myself then, with lots of great insights, such as the only channels that are actually growing are kind of live chat and apps. There's the 40% increase in handling times, which I think is very interesting, kind of the wider implications of that, maybe on advisors as well. And that kind of last slide there about from personalizing to proactive to predictive, I think is it's going to be a very interesting trend for the call center of the future. So yeah, moving on to tips and questions that have come in from our chat room, which has been flying as before. I think the first opinions that we've had come in were from the original question we asked at the start of the webinar, which was, what would we improve? What would you improve about your contact center's customer service if you could? And we have answers such as, our system definitely needs a technology refresh, and I would first refresh technology on the current channels and then implement new features step by step. That's it's nice idea there. We've got process maturity for some of our new channels, i.e. social media, WeChat apps, and product review. which is interesting. We've got a tip in now from Paul, who says, we've had to alter our assessment process to recruit based much more on emotional intelligence and personal values and experience and competence. Taking a few chances on people, most were winners. Resilience is key, so we can use our assessment center to test that as much as we can. Do you like this idea, Nicola?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's easy to train skills. It's not so easy to train attitudes. So we've known that for a long time. I think it's just that we've suddenly realized that the kind of emotional intelligence piece is vital for agents, and we can train the skills or provide them with bots to actually upskill them as well. So we can provide that support, but you can't really train the emotional intelligence bit.
I think absolutely that kind of agent assist idea might be, and chatbots might be something that Jeremy discusses later, which is very interesting. We've got an opinion in now from another Nicola, who says, really interesting data that Nicola is sharing, particularly regarding call times increasing as people turn to online apps for the quick hits and the customer service team focusing on more complex emotive calls. This will certainly be the case for us when we launch. Excellent stuff. And now we have an opinion from Stephen, who says, we're embarking on a digital transformation. Your data suggests web chat is growing, but has it peaked? What do you think about this, Nicola, again?
I think it's still going to be growing, and obviously I'm trying to anticipate what our next trends data will say. I don't think it will grow as fast, as we are sort of getting a fairly big uptake across industries of chat at the moment. And obviously there's synchronous versus asynchronous chat as well. So web chat tends to be synchronous, but we're also looking at sort of WeChat and WhatsApp and all sorts of things which are maybe a little bit more asynchronous. So I think there's room for growth still on chat.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting topic. Jeremy, I don't know if you kind of agree that there's still a bit more room for growth on the channel?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely room for growth. I mean, I think when you look at the role of AI and bots within web chat, the ability for bots to be able to deal with more inbound interactions and then seamlessly escalate up to a skilled human when they run out of runway is something that we're seeing more and more of. But it's, as Nicola said, it is definitely not one size fits all. Every single company and almost every customer journey within a company is kind of different. Depends on the customer, depends on the products, price, all of those sorts of things. So I think Stephen's right in one way to sort of flag with all of these things. There's a sort of a tipping point where it reaches a point where people overdo it, introduce it too much, and then it starts to be being asked to do more than it's really capable of, and the customer experience suffers. So where is that point? I don't know, and it will be different for every company.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting as well. I mean, if you have kind of a customer journey that's, if you have kind of a proactive strategy, as kind of Nicola mentioned, and that a proactive web chat might be quite interesting. Say if your customer has a very expensive basket, but they haven't touched in a while, maybe they want that extra assistant. So it's kind of these ideas, as kind of both of you suggested, that we'll perhaps see live chat continue to grow. I've got a question now in from Shiv, who says, do we expect call volumes to reduce for call centers in the future as the digital platforms will be more advanced and more easy and quick to approach in the future? Nicola, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, it's already reducing, so we are seeing evidence that it is. But as I said, I think that intention state tends to dictate, and that's regardless of age. I think there's a lot of myths around millennials out there. I get very cross about millennials research saying millennials never ring. Well, they do if they're in crisis. So even millennials resort to picking up the phone if things are really bad, and I think that's the indication that the phone is a channel that isn't growing, but it is starting to be one of those channels that's actually pretty good at handling complex and emotive stuff. So yeah, I think that the call volumes will be going down, but as I said, often because those calls are more complex, they take longer to resolve. So yeah.
Yes, I'm a millennial and I have phoned the call center in the past week. So
Yeah.
there we go, exactly. So we've had a tip in from Ono now, who says, create a sandbox theme to first test new channels on a small scale in a controlled environment. This allows you to explore, test, and understand new channels and technology before rolling it out to the wider organization. Jeremy, is this kind of an idea that you are on board with?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it makes it makes complete sense, and I think you know, one of the mistakes we see lots of organizations do is not doing this. So they run to introduce a channel, and I think social media was a classic example of that, where the sales and marketing people in most organizations thought, great, here's a channel to do free marketing to all of the end customers, started putting, you know, outbound communication through those channels, and then seemed surprised when the customer decided to start using those for inbound inquiries or complaints. So absolutely, you know, these things need to be tested and tested per customer journey and per customer persona type.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that idea of the personas actually in terms of testing as well is a very important point. So just a kind of final question now from Sean, who says, with agents being the most expensive resource of almost all contact centers, the efficiency has to come from reducing what agents have to interact with. They should only have the most complex cases passed to agents where they can't be resolved elsewhere. The question is how to best achieve this. What are your thoughts on this one, Nicola?
So, I mean, we're starting to see, obviously there's things like robotic process automation, which is coming in to hopefully take away all of the sort of rekeying and drudgery that agents often have to do. So, I mean, that'll take away some of it. I absolutely agree that one of the other things that we've been looking around the contact center piece is actually there does seem to be a big kind of convergence at the moment between what we talk about typically in contact center, but also what we talk about around collaboration, because the other implication is that agents also need to collaborate across organizations or possibly beyond the organizational boundary to sometimes resolve some of these problems. You know, so that problem solver category, that persona that I talked about very briefly earlier, that the collaboration piece is very important for that role. So yeah, I mean, I think automation, it's not the ultimate answer, but it can gradually take away the stuff that the machines are good at, so the repetitive transactional stuff, and theoretically that should leave the agents with the stuff that actually they should be good at. So yeah.
Excellent. There's lots of great tips and questions in that section. So once after our next session, we'll be coming back to the chat room. So if you can keep putting your questions and tips in there, that will be excellent. But for now, we're going to quickly do a poll, which is, when do you expect your contact center to have less than 50% of voice contacts? The options are: we already do, within a year, within 3 years, within 5 years, or more than 5 years. So I'll just quickly launch that poll for everyone. Excellent. And Jeremy, what are you expecting to see on this one?
To be perfectly honest, I think this is one of those questions that you have to answer from the position of what organization you're in. So for example, if you were sat here right now and said, I'm in Ryanair, you know, you're probably going to be answering, we're already there. If you're sort of phoning from, you know, a high net worth private banking company like Coots, it's probably going to be more than 5 years, and it's a sort of a spectrum depending on who you are and what you're doing and what your customers are like. And there isn't a right or wrong answer to this question. It's really about what's right for your business and what's right for your end customer.
Excellent. Let's check the results, and I'll share those with everyone. And I think, yes, as you've said, Jeremy, there is definitely quite a wide range of responses here. So 10% say we already do, 14% within a year, 28% within 3 years, 16% within 5 years, and 32% more than 5 years. So yeah, kind of as we expected, really, I think, with that one. But now I think is the perfect chance to actually hand over to you, Jeremy. So you can present your presentation. I'll just hand over the baton.
Great, thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah. So okay. So this is the scary moment when you leave the marketing guy in charge of technology. So so hopefully you can all see my screen with the robot hand touching the human hand. So what I'll do is I'll just start to give you a sort of highlight of some of the things that Enghouse sees in the marketplace, some of the questions that we quite often get asked. You know, as a company, we have about 10,000 customers worldwide. We're in and out of customer meetings every day and kind of get asked a lot of the same questions every day. So, you know, we talked about this sort of balance between man and machine, super agent, super bot, this kind of piece. And I think when you look at the slide that Nicola presented that showed the role or the changing roles or changing face of people in the contact center, where she had the slide of Natalie, the negotiator, you know, Chris, the outsourced social supervisor, that type of stuff. Quite often what we're starting to see is contact centers don't really look like contact centers anymore. You know, a concept that we call connected enterprise. So these can be networked experts that are typically on a much higher pay grade than somebody who just is dedicated to the contact center role. But they have very specific domain expertise for a specific problem. And they also have a day job. So they kind of get pulled in and out of customer interactions, quite often complex interactions as and when needed. We talked a lot, you know, in Nicola's presentation about, you know, the balance and what's right and where AI and bots and technology, you know, where it plays well and where it doesn't play well and where the human skills kind of work. And we'll come on to later on in the presentation where that works. Digital transformation. So we talked, you know, in the poll up the start of the presentation about you know, what are the biggest drivers, you know, within the contact center, and the introduction of digital channels is key. Gartner run a survey of, I think, about 2,500 CIOs worldwide every year. Digital transformation has been top of the list for about the last 5 years. I suspect it will be there for the next 5. Most organizations are trying to sort of move themselves more towards the Amazon model, which is, you know, there's a lot of advanced automation and processing going on in the background that doesn't need to be touched by the human hand. And that kind of leads us on to the next point, which is really most analyst firms kind of predict that sort of 85% of customer interactions in the next 36 months will be handled by automation in some way, shape or form. And I think it's probably useful at this point just to sort of almost in your mind substitute the word bots, AI, algorithms, all of those kind of fancy words that tech companies like us like to use for the words advanced automation. Ultimately, what you're trying to do is automate what makes sense to be automated. We talked about collaboration, and we briefly touched upon this. You know, I think one of the questions that came out from somebody in the chat room was around, you know, what's the role of the agent or the employee moving forward? And as Nicola kind of said, if you've got 85% of interactions moving through self or automated AI, we'll call it what you will, service, by definition, the stuff that's left is really awkward, ugly, and complex. So the type of skills that you need are going to be quite different. And they're sort of like the skills that were on you know, Nicola's slide that showed the kind of different roles and constituencies that you need to pull in to solve a problem. We see a big shift towards cloud and consumption mindsets, and I think if you think about your own life in the last sort of 3, 4, 5 years, you've probably signed up for Spotify and Netflix and things like that, and you're consuming your media on a subscription basis where you don't actually really own the CD or the video anymore. You just pay for a monthly subscription and can have what you want, and you pay for what you consume. So we see that with a lot of our customers as well. They want to consume technology and services in a way that corresponds to the way their business is moving. And data is the new gold. And I think there's many sort of stories about this in terms of, you know, you go onto Amazon and, you know, people that just bought the product like you did also went on to buy XYZ product, and you get those 3 little cross-sell opportunities at the bottom of the page. But you also see data at a more macro level. So if we think about, you know, the US elections or the referendum in this country, or Cambridge Analytica, you see data being used increasingly in ways that weren't expected, for good and bad. So, you know, I watched BBC News this morning, and Mark Zuckerberg is there sort of apologising once again for data being used, you know, not in the way that customers first anticipated. So data is gold, but it needs to be treated with the utmost respect. So if we then start to think about a customer journey, these are some of the customers that you know, we're currently working with. So the Futures Housing Group is a customer, and they tend to work. What's interesting about how they've gone about their process is, you know, in a highly collaborative way. So I think one of the, as you start to introduce this type of technology into you know, any organization, there's a lot of fear and a lot of suspicion from agents. So people worry about their role and their job and how it's going to affect them. And if you don't take people with you on this, sort of underneath the covers, people are going to kind of work against you. So it's very important that you have a program that's fairly open and transparent, and people can understand what's in it for them and what the win is going to be. And so Futures Housing Group have, you know, rolled out you know, digital customer experience, digital channels, but they also did an amazing job of bringing their own staff with them and broke down those sort of barriers of resistance. Fujitsu is a customer of ours, and they, you know, lots of organizations outsource their IT help desk. And this is sort of predominantly what Fujitsu do. And it's a business that's notorious for having sort of thin margins, profit margins, and tight SLAs. So clearly it's an organization that needs to work quite hard to you know, create an economy of scale. And so they use AI or bots or automation as much as possible alongside self-service, and then layer in the human element, you know, to deal with those sort of more complex and difficult problems. When we think about Home Group, it's another customer of ours. They work in the housing association space as well, but they are very good at proactive notifications. So sending text messages and giving people the one-time URLs to click on to effectively self-serve and stay on top of it. And if you think about your own life, you know, whenever you order something and a courier company comes up, it's really expensive for a courier company that may be making £1 or £2 out of delivering that parcel to your door to then handle a phone call from you, and their profits all gone. So they're very, very good at keeping you updated about, you know, when it's going to be delivered, if you're not in where you would like it delivered to, where the driver is, at what time they're going to arrive, do you want to reschedule? So they're constantly kind of staying in touch with you and avoiding that need, you know, for you to make a physical phone call to them. So that kind of transparency of information is key. If we think about Ringo, most of you have parked a car in the UK at some point in the last year in a town centre, and you didn't have a small kind of car boot full of pound coins, so you've had to pay, you know, with your phone or with a card. And again, this is really a great example of what, you know, is called advanced automation. You know, you could spin it up to say, okay, it's AI and bots, but actually really this is the same process again and again and again. So when Nicola talked about you know, where AI or bots work very well, they tend to work very well in predetermined, predefined situations, where the process and the journey is almost identical every time. So you see this a lot in the travel industry around trains and flights and transport, where the number of variables is predetermined and predefined. And you know, Ringo have a phenomenally high straight-through process automation rate, but they equally have, you know, most importantly, those escape hatches built into those automated processes to allow you to escalate. If the automated process goes wrong, you can rapidly escalate into a contact center and speak to somebody who will solve your problem very, very quickly. So a very nice blend between, you know, man and machine. So this is now to give you a sense of a typical customer journey. So if we think about the way this a journey could work, you know, the first thing just as if you walked into a hospital A&E department, the first thing you have to do is triage the patient, and in this case, triage the interaction. Who are you? What's your problem? What are you trying to do? And now you can start to make some intelligent decisions about what's the best route for you to take through the organization. And it could be, you know, that you go down the right-hand side of this, and it's pretty much a fully automated route. This is actually a journey map or a simplified journey map for one of our customers. But, you know, the right-hand side of this is fully automated. We have a task bot dealing with, you know, predetermined, prepackaged journeys. We have an info bot that's providing or capturing, gathering information that's required for the task bot to make the decisions it needs to make. But perhaps most importantly, as we look at the orange and pink boxes in the middle, or circles in the middle, there's the escape hatch built through that when this process is struggling, when the info bot can't find the information or the task bot can't make sense of that information, it's able to escalate it over to the left-hand side of the screen, which is the human side of it, the human agent or the human employee dealing with it. And when we think about humans dealing with interactions, there's certain stuff that's fairly routine and mundane. So we have a helper bot that will go there and capture and gather information. We have a coaching bot that is listening to the conversation bidirectionally, so listening to the customer, but also listening to the agent. And as it can understand, you know, really what the agent is trying to do, and instead of that scenario that you hear where you hear an agent saying, can you just hold on a moment, I need to go into another system to kind of find your CRM record or your transaction file or your payment history, the helper bot can go do that in real time for you. So it speeds up the transaction and the interaction, and allows the human agent to do what they're good at, which is, you know, talk, empathy, rely on kind of gut instincts and those type of things, whilst the helper bot is doing the mundane stuff in the background. Equally, we see the coacher bot used in some of our customers in a compliance situation. So, for example, we work with some people that collect debts or financial service organizations, and it's highly regulated. There are predetermined financial conduct authority phrases that have to be used and adhered to. And if you don't use those right phrases in the right way, the contract that you have with that customer can be void. So again, the coach bot can listen to that and make sure that the right things are being said at the right time in the right way. So, you know, a nice balance, I think, between, you know, automation, between info bots, coach bots, helper bots, AI, and the human. And I think for most organizations, that is ultimately where the answer is going to sit. It isn't going to be everything moves to AI or bots or everything stays as it is with humans. It's really playing to the skills and strengths of both constituents. So if you start to think about how would you go about mapping this out and getting this to work within your own organization, we sort of advocate people look at this initially from a customer journey point of view. And if you think about the, you know, top 5 customer journeys within your organization, and there, you could break this down. What are the top 5 journeys in terms of cost? What are the interactions that cost your business the most amount of money, or what are the interactions that create the most amount of revenue, or what are the ones that have caused you the biggest headache in terms of regulatory compliance? But map them out around and understand what the primary driver is within the interaction. So for example, if you went on to Amazon today and, you know, bought a let's just say you went onto Amazon and bought a yoga mat, there is a revenue perspective, because we're now looking at the profile of you as a customer, looking at the product you've bought and working out ways that we can either cross or upsell you more products, and using business analytics in the background to say people just like you who bought this product also went on to buy XYZ products. There's a cost process. You know, a yoga mat's not a particularly expensive product, so, you know, the interaction needs to be handled in as automated way as possible and a straight through process way as possible. Otherwise, nobody makes any money out of it. And for certain products that you might be buying, you know, on a site, let's say like Amazon, you know, there could be a regulatory compliance. You could be selling glue, you could be selling a knife, you could be selling something that has a legal piece to it. So as you start to map out that journey and understand in prioritized order what is the main purpose of this journey, you can now start to think about how you map that out. We think about the persona and profile of the customer. So, not all customers are equal, and not all customers are equal in terms of capability. So, as you start to create those personas and segment your customers, some people are going to be, more facile and comfortable using digital channels. Some customers are going to prefer to use a voice channel. And if we start to think again about the interaction type, contacting your bank to do a balance lookup on your bank account is a fairly transactional routine thing, great to be handled through AI or a bot. But if we're a 50, 60-year-old person and we're trying to take out a mortgage and we've got a poor credit history, well, that's a completely different conversation and level of complexity. So we can now start to layer these two things together to start to make some decisions about what the right channel could be. And as you start to do this and model out your top 5 journeys, you'll start to sort of build a picture of what your landscape is like. And whilst this slide may kind of like, you'll look at this and think there's only one small piece of white space left on the left-hand side of the slide, there's a lot of information. I think when we typically go into a company, if you think about this as a jigsaw puzzle, most organizations that we go into already have 85 to 90% of what they need. Some places already have 100%. Most people have got a lot of the system or technologies that they need to be able to optimize a customer journey. What they haven't done is think about it in the right way. They haven't thought about it in the context of customer journeys, and they haven't then mapped the technology and the role of the automation, the bot, and the AI, and the human agent into that journey. And that's really the key. Once you understand what you're trying to achieve and what good looks like, what's the optimal journey is, you can then move on to this piece, which is the technology piece of thinking about how do you want to deploy it, what data and information do you need to optimize that journey, how are you going to communicate back and forth with your customer, and how do you build some level of continuous improvement into it, what's the role between man and machine, human and agent. So at a high level, that's generally the way, working with our partners, we engage with end customers to start to understand what good looks like. And then the technology conversation is very much a secondary consideration. The most important thing is getting that optimal journey mapped out first. So I've covered a lot of content there in a very short period of time. That would normally be probably something like a 3-hour initial session with a customer. But we do have a bunch of information on this stuff, white papers, videos, case studies, and documents that can be downloaded via our website that give a little bit more information on these things. So with that said, I'm going to hand back to you, Charlie, and we'll take it from there. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeremy. I think just quickly to bridge on from that, we're just going to do quickly a poll, which was, would you like to see a demonstration of the Enghouse solution? And I think that would kind of involve all the wonderful technologies that Jeremy introduced to us during that. And I think there was lots of key takeaways that I took from that presentation as well. I think, firstly, have a transformation program that is transparent and where people can see where the wins are going to be. I think that's a particularly good point. I think as well that the best use cases for bots are in predefined circumstances was really nice, and it was also really great to see a technology roadmap that was so clean as that was from one of your customers, Jeremy. So yeah, that was great to see. Excellent. So I'll just close that poll. So now moving on to the tips and questions finally before we finish. We have a first question in now from Mark, who says, it's to me. It says, Charlie, you mentioned that you called the call center out of interest. What was your requirement to call due to digital tool failure or perceived complex issue that could only be handled by the phone? It was actually because of digital failure. It was a card payment on self-service that went a bit wrong. So I had to call back. And actually, as I called back through the IVR, I'm not best pleased I had to call into the call center. They played me a sales message, which wasn't too well received. But yes, anyway, we'll move on to the next question, which was sent in by Sean, who says, we know that millennials prefer self-service, but what does the customer service look like as we look at the incoming Generation Z workforce? How do we prepare to react to the new demands there? I know, Nicola, you spoke a bit about this earlier, but Jeremy, would you have any thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think there's a whole sort of bunch of factors that kind of meld together with this. So sort of Nicola mentioned the gig economy. So I think when you think about how interactions are going to get solved, we've talked about a lot of the routine, mundane, predictable stuff is going to get solved through advanced automation, AI, bots. The more complex stuff is going to get solved, through collaboration and collaboration teams. So, that's why you see technologies like Microsoft Teams, like Slack growing, phenomenally. It's the fastest growing application in Microsoft's history. So, the ability to have an environment where different constituents can collaborate on a complex problem is key. And those constituents could be, employees within your organization. So like exactly the slide that Nicola put up with Natalie, the negotiator, and Tony, the techie. But they could also be people outside of your business. So this could be your lawyer. It could be a third-party supplier, but it can also be the customer themselves. So we see people providing customers with one-time URLs into so Natalie, negotiator, may have negotiated a settlement or solution for you. You're given a one-time URL to log into the system, review that offer, if you like, and either accept it or reject it and add notes as to why you are or aren't happy with it. So this ability to work across time zones with different skills and different people that can really add value to a particular person's problem is key. And I think what you'll start to see when we think about Generation Z workforce is you're probably going to see people sat kind of in their own home office at home with a specific skill, perhaps one of the skills that Nicola described, and they might use that skill for like 10 different companies. So they may not just be tied to working for, Ryanair or somebody. They might be working for 10 different airlines, but they're very good at negotiating settlements.
Excellent. I think we just finally have time for one final question that has been sent in by Shaz, who says, if the voice channel is not going to be dead in the very near future, is the use of AI and machine learning going to turn the voice channel experience super slick and the channel of choice subsequently moving the trend upwards? I don't know, Nicola, if this is something you want to take on.
It is, and there's some interesting stuff that we've been looking at around voice assistants, because we've been speculating whether the smartphone causes us to throw away the keyboard and the mouse and go into the land of the swipe and the voice assistant. The interesting initial research we've done on voice assistants is showing that if you have a problem with the voice assistant, you're probably going to use the voice channel to contact the contact center, which could theoretically increase call volumes into the contact center. So yeah, I think actually, because we're seeing it as a strategic channel anyway, if we do see that trend of voice assistants actually promoting voice contact, I think the voice channel is going to be one where we really do need to get it right. So I think there may well be some investment into the voice channel in the near future to try and make sure we get the super slick experience.
Excellent. Wonderful, and I think that brings us to the end of today's webinar. So just to help us to keep improving our webinar programs, in the chat room, if you could just put in 1 or 2 words, what did you like best about the webinar? That would be excellent. And just time for a final winning tip now that was sent in by Sean, who says, going from the call center to the contact center, we couldn't do the jump to multi-skilled agents at once, so we're having silo channels to separate groups of agents with a plan to merge once we understand the KPIs for each channel. The challenge we had initially was getting the right agents for the right role. Great conversationalist agents who are good on the phone have different skills to those who are experts in grammar, speed of typing for web chat. So that's excellent. Thank you, Sean, and I hope you enjoy your bottle of champagne or box of chocolates. So also, just again, because we like to gather your feedback, if you could complete the survey after the webinar, which is, and when you leave the webinar, just make sure you fill it in. It's only 4 questions long, but it would be really great if you could. And just a final kind of note too, that you can watch the replay and to get the slides by following www.callcenterhelper.com/recorded-webinars, which will be available on our site this afternoon. And also on our site this afternoon will be the last 2 webinars of our conference. It's been really great so far, and especially today's webinar, in my biased opinion. So we have 7 ways technology can improve the contact center at 1, and a webinar on service design at 3. So if you want to sign up for those, just go to www.callcenterhelper.com/webinars. So just a final time say thank you to our speakers. Thank you, Nicola.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to Jeremy.
Thanks, everyone.
Excellent. Yes, and we'll be back at 1. Bye for now.